Well, thanks for joining us. This is Good Afternoon, Ghana. My name is Aldo Moro. This afternoon, it's all about the economy, the economy, the economy, the economy. I mean, we're all feeling the pinch of the harsh realities of the economy. Well, a section of Ghanaians have been complaining about what we call the bread and butter issues. In fact, as we speak today, petrol prices have gone up. The CD appears to be misbehaving, and I'm using that in quotes. But in all of this, there's supposed to be a program we have reached with the IMF to just make sure that we tame or we put the economy back on track. And there's been a lot that's been happening in as far as that is concerned. The latest is that Ghana has reached a staff level agreement with the International Monetary Fund for the second review of the Extended Credit Facility, which is the ECF, and this will result in the release of some $360 million by the fund, which is subject, of course, to the approval of the IMF management and board, which we understand will be coming off in the next few months. But in order to put all of this in perspective and to help you understand why the economy is the way it is and what government or some of the policies that government is pursuing, some of the programs and some of the strategies that the government is putting in place to make sure that the economy gets better. I'm going to be introducing a man who works directly with the finance minister. He's a technical advisor at the finance ministry, and he has a lot to share with us to give Ghanaians hope, for Ghanaians to look forward to something. I will be right back. My name is Aldo Moro. All right, welcome back. This is Good Afternoon, Ghana. My name is Aldo Moro. I'm going to share with you a WhatsApp line for those of you who would want to join the conversation. It's extremely important. I think that sometime last week I didn't share the number early enough, but here's the number: 0244262314, 0244262314. Tell us how tell us your feelings and your thoughts about the economy and how you're dealing with the economy, how you are managing with this economy. 0244-262-314. It would be displayed on your screens shortly. But let me just say quickly that I have been joined in the studio by the technical advisor to the finance minister, who is he's called Dr. Abdul Ganiyu. He's a technical advisor, Ministry of Finance. Actually, it's a ministry, not exactly the minister himself. Doc, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure having you here on Good Afternoon, Ghana.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, the economy is very crucial. The economy is primus inter pares. Everything we do, it comes down to the economy. We don't have an economy, we don't have a country. And so a lot of Ghanaians are looking forward to hearing what it is, what's going on. Because the economy we're living in some very really harsh economic times. But even before we get into specifics, I want to know from you. I mean, since Dr. Mohamed Amin Adams was announced as the new finance minister, I think that must have been on Val's Day, February 14. They say new king, new law. What is Dr. Mohamed Amin Adams' focus and his vision for the finance ministry since he assumed office?
Well, I think it's important to appreciate that in assuming the office of finance minister, Ghana was already under a fund program.
Absolutely.
So it's the minister's vision that we have to pursue this program and ensure that whatever objectives, whatever criteria that are set under the IMF program, we should be able to achieve that in order to restore macroeconomic stability. So that's the first thing that the minister has been at. So all the technical reviews, technical meetings that resulted to the coming of the IMF, for example, for us to undergo the second review, and the fact that it has been successful has been one of the fundamentals of his vision for the period that he remains as finance minister. Now, he also brings something new, which has to do with SME development and SME financing. I'm talking about small and medium-scale enterprises. In this country, 80 to 90% of the industrial sector is composed by SMEs. And one of the major problems confronting SMEs has to do with financing.
Right.
Access to capital either for startups or already existing businesses. And most of the time, they may not meet
As an already existing business that intend to expand.
Exactly.
Okay.
So mostly some of these businesses may not even meet requirements
Right.
of the formal banking system.
Right.
So the whole idea is how can we use the machinery of government to provide support to these SMEs in terms of the financial support, but also the technical support. So working with the Ghana Enterprise Agency, for example, some more funds are expected to be channeled in that particular direction, and then we'll find the best way of overcoming most of the challenges that SMEs are confronted with in this country.
Okay.
So an SME development fund is going to be launched very, very soon.
Okay.
Working with the finance ministry as well as the Ghana Enterprise Agency. So that's where we are on that particular vision. Now, the minister also believes that in the times that we find ourselves, there's the need for us to carry everyone along. So he finds collaboration to be very, very key. So one of those critical stakeholders that we have identified, for example, is academia. And as I speak to you, we are at the verge of signing an MOU with the University of Ghana, where we will institute what we call a quarterly roundtable with academia.
I see.
So that's where all the issues are put bare, technical papers are presented. All of those recommendations that are going to come through will inform government policy, would inform budgets, would inform even how implementation of these policies and programs are going to be done. That is one of the key visions of the finance minister. Then, of course, there's the other vision of how do we increase revenue mobilization, because all of this talk about the IMF comes down to the fact that we do not mobilize
Enough domestic resources.
revenue domestically.
Right.
So what are some of the innovative measures, innovative means that we can institute as a nation in order to boost local revenue mobilization as one of the key visions of the finance minister? I don't know if we will come to that, but there's this talk about taxing Ghanaians who are resident in Ghana,
Yes.
and also foreigners
It's
who
extremely
are
important, yeah.
resident in Ghana
Yeah.
for, let's say, more than 183 days,
Right.
to the extent that they earn income from
Right.
abroad by virtue of some other works
Okay.
that they are
But we'll
doing.
get there when we get to the point about how do we show up domestic revenue.
Exactly. So shoring up domestic revenue
Right.
is one of the visions of the finance
Minister. Okay.
for the period that he remains finance minister. This is something that we are going to pursue very rigorously. So once all of that is done, we can be sure that enough revenue is in place. Our debt to GDP ratio is expected to come down. And by 2028, all the targets that have been set under the IMF program, for example, would have been met.
It's quite interesting because when you mentioned that the finance minister has been focusing on generating revenue domestically, I said, but how about also being fiscally prudent? You know, I'm talking about expenditure.
Of course.
And I've heard him say it a number of times that, in fact, he said it with the central bank governor, that under his watch, we're not going to have the kind of fiscal recklessness that we engage in usually during election years. You want to throw some more light on that?
Yes, exactly the point. I mean, the finance minister has said time and again that he's going to hold the line so as far as expenditure, even in the election year, is concerned.
Can he?
I think
Can
he
he
can.
master the political will
He
to
can,
do that?
He can. At the end of the
Because
day,
there's a lot of pressure.
We have to accept the fact that we are under a fund program.
Right.
And that fund program has set for us a number of criteria, about 9 of them. And one of those critical areas is how you can ensure fiscal prudence. So if you have a finance minister who has been bold in saying every now and then that even in an election year, I am going to hold the line on expenditure, it means that every measure that we are going to pursue to be able to achieve this particular objective, we should be able to do that.
Look, you see,
and one of the critical points has to do with engaging all of these stakeholders and letting them understand the state of the economy and indeed where we are and where we are headed, the kind of challenges or constraints that continue to confront us. We have to be very realistic about these kind of conversations.
Right.
And since he took over, he's had series of meetings with various stakeholders, the labor unions, those in academia, those in the trading industry, for example. So talk about AGI, GUTA, so on and so forth. So it is for all of us to come to the table and agree on where we are, the fundamental challenges that confronts us as an economy, and that notwithstanding the fact that we are in election year, we need to be very careful about how we spend so that we do not derail the benefits that we have made so far since we signed up for the program. The reason why,
and sorry if I sound like I'm belaboring the point, but the reason why I talked about whether he'll be able to master the political will to do that is because oftentimes in an election year, it's not so much about what the finance minister wants or doesn't want, but it's about usually the pressure from the political parties on which they run and to come to power. The general secretary is on a lot of pressure from, say, the chiefs or even the chairman. I'm talking of the party operatives. They come under a lot of pressure from, interest or identifiable groups as to what exactly they want. The thing about it is that they also feel that it's an election year. If I don't get it in an election year, then it's never going to happen. So the amount of pressure that the sections of the public put on these political parties makes it very difficult for them to actually hold true to their promise of not spending beyond a certain limit. Being fiscally disciplined or prudent. And that's why I'm asking whether, yes, good intentions, fantastic intentions, can he master? Can he have the political will to do that? And that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
And then two, just closely tied to that, connected to that. Look, the NPP has said it time and again that they want to break the 8. Now, breaking the 8 will mean that they have to make Ghanaians happy. Even if later they come back to say, well, we're sorry, we had to do certain things because we had to. And I'm saying that it's a political economy. So how does the new finance minister really convince us that he means it when he says, I will not spend beyond a certain limit?
What I think is important to appreciate
there's a reality check.
Moro, we have to appreciate the fact that the finance minister is an appointee
of the president. True.
So whatever vision the finance minister has must be in agreement with the president's vision.
To all intents and purposes.
Exactly. And the president was the one who actually took the bold decision for Ghana to sign up for the IMF program.
Right.
So that will mean that anything we have to do in the context of the fund program, the president does agree.
Okay.
And the election year is so critical. If you do anything outside of your budget or outside of your fiscal policies,
there won't be any economy beyond 2024.
It is going to derail the economy.
Right.
And I do not think that the president, under any circumstance, will want to hand over to the next president in an economy that comes to its needs.
Right.
So these are discussions that certainly the finance minister has had with the president.
Right.
And across the board, everyone agrees that we have to be very prudent even if we find ourselves in an election year.
Yeah.
And I think so far, the finance minister has continued to hold the line. We are towards June, which is mid-year, and by that time, the finance minister would have presented a mid-year budget review, and clearly we would have seen all the figures in terms of our fiscal balances, our primary balances, so on and so forth. So that clearly would have given a clear picture that up to December of 2024, whether we'll be on course to ensuring the fiscal prudence that the finance minister has
continued. We went to the IMF because we want the IMF to help us put the economy back on track. Of course, backed by our own homegrown, solutions and strategies and plans and programs, which is called the PCPEG.
Yes.
Now, from where you sit, yes, the IMF has given us a pass, but the ordinary Ghanaian on the streets of Accra would say, what kind of pass is the IMF giving us? Because fuel prices are going up, the city is still misbehaving, so basically the economy is still harsh. How do you explain, how do you reconcile the realities of the ordinary Ghanaian, right, with what the IMF is saying? In fact, I've heard the Honorable Isaac Adongo, who is a member of parliament for the Bongatanga, says, look, the IMF people, they don't go to Makola to buy foodstuff. The IMF guys don't buy fuel, etc., etc. So help the ordinary Ghanaians watching us who may not be technically inclined or technically, sound to be able to understand how the IMF is saying, well, we're on course, quantitatively and the structural reforms, everything is going well. And then the person was sitting there and say, but the system hard, how do you reconcile these two positions or opinions that are being expressed?
So just to avoid the technical arguments,
right,
I'll use one or two indicators
okay,
to try to bring that down to the ordinary Ghanaian. So first, if you talk of inflation, all right, now by the time we were announcing that we could no more service our debts because debt to GDP ratio had gone very high,
right,
beyond the limits of what you would describe as debt sustainability.
Absolutely.
And inflation at that time was around 54.1%. And what that simply means to the ordinary Ghanaian is that prices of goods and services on the market were increasing at a rate of 54.1%.
Right.
And indeed, for anyone who lived in Ghana at the time, we were all witnesses to the skyrocketing nature of the prices of goods and services on the market. That is very true. If you were on social media, for example, you would have seen people bring up how much a gallon of oil was priced,
True,
how much a bag of rice was priced, a bar of soap, so on and so forth. But about 2 years down the line, we do not hear that argument anymore.
Right.
That is simply because inflation has been coming down for a while. So from the 54.1%, we are now talking about 23.2%, an indication that yes, goods and services may still be increasing, but they are now doing so at a decreasing rate. So even if we feel the pinch, but we are not more feeling the pinch as much as we felt.
So the prices are going up.
Prices are,
but it's going up at a lower rate.
At a lower rate.
Much lower rate.
Exactly. Because sometimes you need that for purposes of production. Because at the end of the day, people are going to gather all the factors of production at their costs. And once they produce and they take it to the market, they also expect some appreciable profits. That is the only way we can continue to have access to the goods and services that we need to support our daily lives.
Right.
So to that extent, prices may be going up, but at what rates are they going up?
Right.
And that is why we don't talk about that so much.
Okay.
And this is a remarkable achievement because just within a space of a year, we were able to reduce inflation by half of what it was in December 2022. That is end of 2023 inflation being around 23.2%.
Right.
And the last review of the macroeconomic indicators and inflation in particular by the Bank of Ghana and also by the Ghana Statistical Service did confirm that inflation is still around 23.2%.
Right, so we're turning the corner with inflation.
Exactly.
Right.
So let me take the second indicator,
Okay.
which has to do with interest rates.
Absolutely.
I mean, around 2022, for example, if you went to the bank that you wanted to purchase treasury bills, what was the rates of treasury bills? The 91-day T-bill went as high as about 35% at some point. Today, we're talking about some 26 or so percent. Again, an indication that the interest rates are falling.
Right.
The Ghana reference rate was so high, and perhaps it was one of the reasons why it affected industrial growth for the year 2023. So we actually had industry contracting as far as growth is concerned. And that simply meant that industry players perhaps did not have much access to credit.
Because it was too expensive.
Exactly. Even if they had access, then it was expensive.
Yeah.
That was the reason.
Yeah.
But the interest rates are beginning to come down, and we hope that they should even come down below 20% at some point.
Right.
That will mean that people doing business, people in industry can approach the banks access loans at a lower rate, which will expand productivity, create a lot more jobs, and then put a lot more money in the pockets of people.
Right.
All of these things have happened still within the regime of Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo. In other words, he has not left that perhaps for another government to come and be challenged with. And they are the ones who have to work in order to reverse the situation. So whatever challenges we're confronted with due to COVID and due to the Russian-Ukrainian war, we have taken measures, bold measures, that are working and eventually getting us out of those economic challenges or economic difficulties. So those are just two indicators. And today, as we speak, our trade balance is positive, an indication that we are basically exporting more than we are importing. That is a rarity, so as far as the nature of the Ghanaian economy is concerned. So it tells you that on the macroeconomic front, positive things are happening. Yes, we totally agree that times are still difficult, and we have never said that we are completely out of those challenges or completely out of the woods. But people can trust measures that we are putting in place just to ensure that we restore macroeconomic stability, which will then begin to have a more cascading effect on the lives of individuals and to spur the development of our country.
What are some of the things that we're going to come to the main IMF thing and the staff level agreement and what it means and what's next? But there are still people who feel that government can still do something about the size of the government. I know it is not the finance minister's call to make, it's the president's call to make, but we're talking about being fiscally prudent, we're talking about rationalizing expenditure. And so I don't know, I mean, you are not the finance minister, but will it be a fair call for somebody to say that a finance minister should be able to tell the president, or Mr. President, we are in a dire economic strait. We're struggling to raise revenue. We've been locked out of the international capital market, and so we've had to, resort to short-term debt instruments in order to finance the budget and so on. It's not that sustainable. Can we do something about the size of your government so that we can spend less? It's called efficiency. Spend less and yet generate more in order to ensure a quicker fiscal consolidation, drive. Will it be a fair ask for somebody to say, Finance Minister, why can't you go to the president and propose some of these ideas to him so that the president doesn't come to say, well, I gave you the job as a finance minister and, the gap between expenditure and revenue is still widening when it is actually not his fault. Well, would that be legitimate?
The gap between revenue
and expenditure
is actually not wide.
Right. It's narrowing.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at our fiscal balance, for example, for 2023, right. We're talking about a primary balance of about 11.2%.
Okay.
In 2022, and we're able to bring that down to 3.9% for 2023.
Okay.
So that tells you that the fiscal consolidation measures that government introduced even before we signed up for the IMF program are really working.
Okay.
And we are going to continue on that particular path.
Right.
And it is one of those reasons that the finance minister has continued to emphasize that he is going to hold the line so as far as expenditure, even in the election year, is concerned.
Okay.
So there are a gamut of measures that have been put in place just to ensure prudence.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, still meeting all of what the IMF has set in terms of the quantitative criteria.
Okay.
So that's where we are. So regarding the size of government, I think, again, it comes down to the president's vision.
Right.
It is all about what the president wants to achieve over this period. And I believe that had it not been COVID, for example, all of us would have seen clearly that the Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo has performed exceedingly well, but we were challenged at some point due to a global health pandemic, a global economic crisis, and of course, the coming of the Russian-Ukrainian war, even making matters worse.
Right.
So that is what may have accounted for the difficulties that we have had from 20 2020
Yes.
up to about 2022.
Well, partly.
You can say partly, but even if it is partly,
Right.
we can examine, if you want, the extent
Yes.
of that particular contribution.
that's a legitimate
So it could be
argument.
70, 80%.
Absolutely, I
That
get
is
that.
what may have accounted for
I get
it.
that.
So that's where we are. So in
Okay.
terms of size, I think I leave it to the president as far as his vision is concerned.
Okay.
And there's every indication that the economy is beginning to do well.
Yeah.
And all the fiscal consolidation measures that we are pursuing, for example, we should look at all of that holistically instead of just looking at a portion of it, which has to do with the size of government.
0244 263. And Mr. Josiah, if you can put the WhatsApp line on the screens for our cherished viewers so that they can, yes, it's 0244 262 314. That's the WhatsApp line for those of you who would want to contribute to the program. Some of you have already started sending in your messages. Very, very important, very relevant questions. I'll be reading them shortly. But let me just say that, Josiah, do we need to take a break, or we should just go on? Okay, right, fine. So let's not go to the IMF meetings. I mean, you've been holding a series of meetings. I mean, we can have a whole discussion about the state of the economy because we've not come to issues about, debt to GDP, how do you call it, fiscal deficit, and so on and so on. There's all kinds of, there's a whole conversation we can have on that. But the focus of this conversation is to update Ghanaians on where we are with the IMF program. So when we say we have attained a staff level agreement, what does that mean? And what's next from here? Where do we go from here?
Okay, so that simply means that as a review team from the IMF had to come to Ghana and engage with the Ghanaian authorities along all the criteria that have been set. So as far as the ECF is concerned, the extended credit facility that Ghana signed up to in May of 2023. So engaging with ministries, departments, agencies, mostly at the finance ministry and also at the Bank of Ghana. And finally, they come to the conclusion that for most of the criteria, Ghana has met most of the criteria. And their recommendation to the executive board of the IMF will be that Ghana should be allowed to access its third tranche of around 360 million US dollars. So once the staff level agreement has been reached, that is the first hurdle, but the second hurdle becomes when they put that report before the executive board of the IMF. And hopefully by June, when they sit, we believe that approval is going to be given. And at the end of the day, Ghana should be in a position to access the third tranche of 360 million US dollars. That would have brought in total 1.56 billion US dollars so far that Ghana would have access. The first tranche was 600, the second tranche 600, and then this third tranche is going to be 360 million. So that's basically what a staff level agreement is, and then what the subsequent steps are going to be even before we access the 360 million.
But within that same week, we also heard that, in fact, it was reported Ghana had hit a snag in the negotiations with these Eurobond holders. In fact, there were about two of them who were mentioned. I actually got the name, it has escaped me, but two of them were mentioned and were told that they have been dragging their feet in agreeing to the terms of the negotiations, and that has sort of slowed the whole process down. Tell us, what do we need to know about this?
Well, I think it's not exactly a snag.
Okay.
It is all about whatever we have reached with the Eurobond holders and the other private commercial creditors. Whether if you bring that within the framework of debt sustainability under the ECF, whether we will be able to get an agreement with the IMF, for example. That's all what it is.
Okay.
So at the end of the day...
So there has been some agreement?
Yes. So at the end of the day, we have reached an interim agreement with the Eurobond holders.
Right.
But there are parameters that have to be met within the IMF program, and that is what we call the debt sustainability analysis. I mean, for example, we are talking about a debt service to revenue ratio of about 11%, And then we are also talking about bringing down our overall debt to GDP ratio to about 55% in 2028. So within those parameters, whatever agreements that you reach with the Eurobond holders, for example, the question becomes whether you'll be on course to achieving these particular objectives that have been set by the IMF. So once that is not the case, then we simply have to go back and see how we can tweak those aspects of the agreement to be within the IMF program. So that is all what it is.
So when Reuters
yes,
reports that Ghana has been in formal talks with two groups holding its international bonds since March 16, one international group of Western asset managers and hedge funds, and another one including the regional African banks. The Regional African Bondholder Group has also rejected part of the proposed rework, including a par option to retain the original value of the bonds with a longer maturity and lower coupon. You're saying it's not entirely accurate.
Agreements have been reached,
Right.
Moro.
But the report says they're rejecting the proposal.
There are technical issues
That
in
have to be
this whole
sorted.
conversation
Okay.
that we would have to sort out.
Right.
But I also have to mention, and to your listeners, that Ghana has non-disclosure agreements with these Eurobond holders and the other private commercial creditors. So on any platform, not me, not the minister himself or any official can actually make some of these disclosures.
I get it.
So that's where it's going to be. But we have assured that when all of these negotiations are done, a statement will be put out indicating what Ghana has reached with the Eurobond holders. That is where we are on it. So because of those non-disclosure clauses, there are quite a lot of issues that I will not be able to put out. But just for the good people of this country to take the assurance that we are working extremely hard to tie all the knots, get over all the obstacles or challenges, and at the end of the day, we'll surely have a deal in place.
Okay.
But that report that we had hit a snag is exactly not the case. At the end of the day, an interim agreement is in place. We simply have to go back to the Eurobond holder to see how those portions of the agreement can be tweaked to be in line with the debt service sustainability program of the IMF. And that is where we are.
And failure to attain this would mean what? If we're not able to reach an agreement with external creditors. So that's my next question too. We have to take a break when I come back. So, because I want to know, failure to reach that agreement with external creditors would mean what?
Okay.
360 no mbana. People want to know that. I'll take a short break. This is Good Afternoon Ghana. We're having a conversation about Ghana's economy and where we are as far as our engagement with IMF is concerned. I'll be right back. Well, thank you very much for joining us once again. In case you just tuned in, this is Good Afternoon Ghana. We're talking about bread and butter. We're talking about Ghana's economy. We're fortunate to have a technical advisor of the Finance Ministry, Dr. Abdul Ganiyu, who's here to walk us through the state of our economy, from where they sit at the Finance Ministry, and also where we are in the scheme of things as far as the negotiations with IMF is concerned. Doc, so I talked about, just before we went on break, I was asking you about, can we still go ahead to secure the 360 million US dollars if the external creditors, play hard or they drag their feet in accepting whatever proposals that we have given them? Because of what some analysts have said is the Zambia example, where the external creditors proved very difficult and that nearly scuttled Zambia's, program with the IMF. What can you say about this?
Yes, I think I have to assure once again that where we are, I am very, very confident that a deal would be in place with the bondholders far more in time, even before the executive board of the IMF meets.
You sound extremely optimistic.
So I am very optimistic that by June, indeed, Ghana will receive the 360 million US dollars, simply because of the non-disclosure clauses, I probably would have provided some more detail, which will then be reassuring that indeed we will get there.
All right.
But when you compare us to the Zambian situation, sorry to say, you are simply comparing apples and oranges.
Right.
Somebody would say they are both fruits anyway.
Right.
But because the fact is that Zambia has been at this for about 3 years. And if you look at the exposure of Zambia, for example, to China, it is quite huge, right? Out of our debt to the external creditors, those coming under the OCC, the Official Creditor Committee, our exposure to China is around 1.7, 1.8 billion.
Right.
So the rest of that is owed to other creditors. So there's a challenge with Zambia on that particular front.
Okay.
And if you also look at what Ghana has been able to achieve so far, it tells you how remarkable the progress has been. First of all, we're able to get a fund program within 5 months, right after the process began. Some other countries, it took them a year. Some others, it took them 2 years, so on and so forth. Ghana secured that in a space of 5 months.
Right.
And since then, Ghana has secured 2 tranches, 600 million, 600 million.
So
it tells you the confidence
with which
that the IMF has.
Okay.
So as far as the Ghanaian situation is concerned. So there's no way we will get to the Zambian situation. That I can assure.
Let me not belabor my point on the debt operations, because there's quite a number of other questions I want to ask, but because of time, let's get onto this. What is this whole talk about taxing Ghanaians who are living here and working and receiving income from abroad? It's where is that thinking coming from?
Yes, you remember that in the 2024 budget,
Yes.
one of the revenue handles we introduced was the 1.8 billion that was expected to come from the VAT on electricity.
True, and we kicked
But
against
exactly, because of agitations,
Yes.
that had to be aborted. So now the question is, how do you plug that particular revenue gap? And this comes down to the innovation that I earlier mentioned, coming from the finance minister. So we looked at the books and we realized that a policy has been on our tax laws, tax administration for a very long time, but there has been the lack of enforcement and also the lack of compliance, which has to do with the fact that resident Ghanaians that are earning income by virtue of some jobs that they are doing remotely whilst they are residents in Ghana, when they receive the incomes, the question is, do they pay taxes? And they don't pay the taxes. And it is no fault of anyone, because data in that regard has been very deficient. And the GRA has been working for some time now in order to build a very strong and a very robust database that will be able to identify what jobs people are doing, irrespective of where they are residents, what incomes are coming to them, so on and so forth, so that they'll be able to access the needed income tax from those individuals. That is what it is. And we are working within the framework of the OECD. And under the OECD, there's a protocol on the exchange of information. But you have to put in place your measures, your structures, to ensure that you'll be able to access that kind of data. And from where we are, the GRA tells us that they are ready, the systems are in place. Now they are able to identify all the sources of income coming from abroad in respect of resident Ghanaians, but also resident foreign nationals who have been in Ghana for more than 183 days. So that is an innovative revenue handle, even though it's been on the books for quite some time. And we hope that the 1.8 billion Ghana cedi revenue gap is going to be plugged through this policy and some other tax policies. And going forward, it should remain one of the very innovative measures of raising revenue for this particular country.
That's interesting. And somebody sent me a very long and very, very interesting message. I'll read it shortly. But the energy sector, just briefly before you go, I mean, it's about, we have just 2 minutes to go. No, that was about 3 minutes? Yes. What's the finance ministry's own assessment of the energy sector and what's happening with Doomso? I mean, We've just gone to relaunch the Ameri power plant in Kumasi, 6 units of it. Yeah. But from where you say, from the finance ministry's point of view, is the Dumso a financial problem? Are you struggling to find money for these IPPs to power their plants so we can have light? What's happening from where you sit?
Well, I think that in terms of the finances in the energy sector, that has been with Ghana for a very long time. You know, that was what took us to Dumso. And of course, the coming of this government meant that it had to confront that particular challenge. And over the period, various measures are put in place just to ensure that you are able to deal with the energy sector financial problems, but also ensuring the efficiency of the energy sector institutions, right from generation all the way to distribution. So there is the energy sector recovery program that the finance minister is working with the Ministry of Energy and other sector agencies such as the PURC, the Energy Commission, so on and so forth, so that we can deal with this problem
on hindsight. Do you think it was a good idea to collateralize the ESLA? On hindsight?
Well, I think that from where we sit, ESLA certainly is one of the areas that we are looking at in terms of restructuring, okay? Because once our bonds started to face a challenge, then of course, ESLA was going to come under that remit as well. And I know the finance minister is working with various stakeholders on the best way to be able to restructure the ESLA debts as well. You are also aware of the cash waterfall mechanism that we have introduced, so that once revenues are collected, immediately there's a formula to the sharing of those revenues, and where there are shortfalls, the finance minister does provide some funding to be able to take care of that. But one thing that is also about to be introduced is what we call the energy sector-wide audit. You know, the finance ministry is going to spearhead that just to ensure that wherever revenues are coming from, we are able to determine the sources, and then we can track how those revenues are supposed to be used just to ensure cost efficiency, basically, in the energy sector.
Great. Now, the best thing any journalist can do to an economist or policy analyst who appears on your Nobel program, waxing lyrical on how good the Ghanaian economy is shaping, must be dismissed outrightly. If you move inflation from 13% to 54.3% and down to 23.4%, you don't sit on TV to say you're doing well. If you move inflation below 13% to 12.5%, you can accord them to relevance. As it stands, Ghana's economy is facing serious challenges, requiring serious help from exceptional policy analysts. The country is an already debt-laden country. The addition of more debt from the Bretton Woods institution shall collapse the economy. Let's be mindful. We're in a serious trouble. The sooner we're hoping for help, the better the solutions for this unfortunate situation we find this country cannot be addressed through the use of speaking eloquent English language. Delali Kujuna, the man himself has accepted and conceded that yes, we're not in good times, but he says things are beginning to look better. Yeah, so let's be fair to our guest who appear on the show. He's not here to say everything is kosher.
I haven't said that
at all. And so let's grant him that. Anyway, so my name is Aldo Moro. Thanks for watching. I want to say a big thanks to the production team. Josiah done a fantastic job by producing this program. Let me say that I've been joined in the studio by Dr. Abdul Ganiu, who is a technical advisor, Finance Ministry. My name is Aldo Moro. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.